Hi, my name is Chenyao. I'm from Indiana. I'm a part of obviously Fridays for Future Digital, but also in Indiana locally, a statewide student-led organization called Confront the Climate Crisis, where we're trying to get our state government to declare climate emergency. I'm in central Indiana, so near Indianapolis, near the capital.
How has climate change affected you and changed your daily life?
Yeah, I feel like climate change has affected me in a lot of ways, but a lot of the things that have happened you don't really notice until it's too late, which isn't good. I feel like for me personally, the largest effect that I see is the heat waves, like the global warming part of climate change. I'm a runner, so I go out a lot, especially in the summer. And in like especially last year and this year, there's been a lot more of like those heat waves and especially just like days where we actually have heat advisory warnings. So it's like if you're a young child, if you're elderly, you shouldn't go outside because it's going to get up to like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty warm for us. We're not actually that far south. There's more storms, but at the same time in the summer it's getting drier. So less storms, but more storms. I don't know if that makes sense. When I run a lot, especially on trails, it's dustier. It's harder sometimes because there's more like just particulates in the air. I mentioned I'm in central Indiana. It's pretty close to Indianapolis. So this is obviously the human-made part. We have a lot of factories there. One of our major things is the industry, and they all run off of like coal and fossil fuels. So Indianapolis has experienced a lot of air pollution, especially this summer, and adding that with the heat waves, it's just a very bad mixture. I feel like also going into the part about more storms, Indiana apparently has been added into like the tornado alley like kind of label, which is I mean, I was kind of satisfied when I heard that because we get a lot of tornadoes, but it's also kind of terrible because we get a lot of tornadoes. We've been getting more storms, more lightning storms, which doesn't personally affect me, but it affects a lot of farmers. And I I live in the suburbs, so I see the city, but I also see like the rural, the farms, the many cornfields that make up Indiana. I feel like I feel like it actually has positively affected me because I've learned a lot more about environmental science, a lot more about about why global warming really does affect the earth and why it will really affect Indiana. I've met a lot of people, as I've mentioned, in the Confront the Climate Crisis, and I feel like it has personally affected me because I've gotten a lot more involved in advocating for like more environmental and climate protection, in advocating for, better regulations in our factories that when we're talking about clean water, clean air, which our state government has actually been repealing instead of adding on to. It's like in Bloomington, it's like a relatively decent city. There's like a college there, IU. There's a water reservoir called the Lake Monroe Reservoir, and it provides drinking water to like 100,000 people, like a lot of people, a giant city. Okay, maybe not giant in terms of New York, giant in terms of Indiana. Um, but right now, like the U.S. Forest Service, they're there saying that they want to be like logging thousands of acres of trees, which is going to lead to like erosion, which a lot of like Indiana environmentalists and people that I've actually had the opportunity to meet have said this is going to lead to erosion, this is going to harm the reservoir, this is going to contaminate the drinking water there. And because our Indiana Department of like environmental management that checks this stuff has already said that because of like algae, because of the erosion that's already happened there, that the drinking water in that reservoir is technically already contaminated. But because as I mentioned, a lot of like the Clean Water Acts are being repealed, not just in Indiana, but also in like the US. There hasn't really been anything done about that. So I've had like the opportunity to meet a lot of these scientists, to meet people who are going to like sue the US Forest Service, people who are going to advocate for this. So it has personally affected me in many ways. I feel like a lot of them are positive. Obviously, climate change is not positive, but in the ways it has affected me, it has helped me become like just a more confident person too, since I've tried to get more in contact with my state legislators, calling them. Even I have a meeting actually scheduled with one next month where we're going to talk about, you know, just being like, hey, we're your constituents and we'd really appreciate it if you supported some of this climate legislature, this environmental regulations.
So could you tell me more about your climate activism that you've done?
Yeah, so I was in middle school at the time. I kind of heard about, Greta Thunberg, the whole movement that was going on with Fridays for Future, and then last year, 2019, on the Global Day of Climate Action on September 20th, I decided to skip school and go to a protest in downtown Indiana in front of our state house, and it was it was awesome. Honestly, there were so many people there. There was actually news, I guess, how do I say this? There was a journalist there actually covering what we were doing. And I went there with some of my friends and we made signs and we talked a lot in front of the state house. I felt like that really encouraged me to dive deeper into climate activism and environmental activism and see really what was happening in Indiana. A lot of what we talked about on that day was clean air protection because, as I mentioned, in downtown Indianapolis, there are so many factories there, and it really is like an urban city. So air pollution there is really the greatest danger. I know even in where I am, which is the suburbs, there have been more days, especially in the summer, where if you go and check the air quality index, there'll actually be a warning for unhealthy for sensitive groups, which obviously isn't a teenager, but still the fact that the warning is there is kind of surprising because there weren't warnings like that. There wasn't actually the air quality index on the weather app, at least for Indiana, until a few years ago, and it got added in because there has actually been increasing air pollution there, and we actually have started to get these warnings. In climate activism, as I mentioned, I joined Fridays for Future this year, but even before that, I was trying to do more in Indiana and especially in my city. We have a school club, which is the Green Action Club. And well, at first I was kind of skeptical, I guess, about how much we could do since we were all high schoolers. But we actually managed to get a lot done, especially since I think I'm lucky to live in a city where our mayor actually really supports going greener and going cleaner. We managed to work a lot with our administration and we got a composting initiative started in our school lunches. We started to reduce plastic, but that actually changed this year because there needs to be more packaging this year in terms of COVID. But we plan on when we can kind of return relatively to normal, we want to try and go back to reducing how much plastic that we use in our school food. This year we've been actually doing some plans to just get more and more people involved. We were talking with administration about going on the announcements and talking more about what's happening in the city, in the state. We've talked about, doing some more we were calling it artivism, where we would try to make posters and murals in our school hallways to just involved a lot of because Indiana, it used to be a giant forest, before colonizers came. And really, I'm lucky that I can in my backyard I can see some of the remaining forest there, but a lot of Indiana's forests have been cut down, which really is a loss because we have a lot of different types of trees, a lot of different types of animals, especially bats that only live in this region. We've been trying to get people more involved with that. This year, as I mentioned, just last month is when Confront the Climate Crisis, which is the statewide organization, really kicked into gear. Before that, there were a lot of really small groups in Indiana that worked in central Indiana. There was the Socialist for Public Liberation that worked a lot for climate activism. There were people in West Lafayette, but this year we've really managed to unite over Zoom mainly. I feel like even though it's been a month, we've got a lot done. We have a petition that's basically asking our state government to declare a climate emergency that's gotten 7,000 signatures. We've gotten a lot of activists like Jamie Margolin. Margolin, she's the founder of Zero Hour. She actually signed our petition. And not just climate activists, but people in Indiana have signed the petition, have starting to get more involved in this. So this month, we've started to meet with more legislators. And so not necessarily ask them, we're actually writing a resolution. It's really cool because this is a group made up of mainly high schoolers and college students. And we're actually writing like a bill that we want to try and get passed, obviously with help from like professional politicians, professional lawyers. We've just been starting to meet with legislators to talk to them, to say like, hey, we'd really appreciate it if you started supporting more of these regulations, more of these bills, because climate change really is going to affect Indiana. We've started to try to get in contact with, more of what people would consider like the Republican crowd that kind of like deny climate change as a thing, but especially in Indiana, because a lot of these people are like farmers living in more rural regions. They're the ones that will actually be hit the hardest by climate change in Indiana, at least, because obviously I mentioned with like earlier the storms and the heat waves, they're going to like it's predicted that they're going to cut down on crop yields by a lot, and it's a really funny stereotype that Indiana's like just cornfields, but I mean it's kind of true. And a lot of people do rely on this, and our economy also does partially rely a lot on crop yields and a lot on coal industry, which is the bad part. So we've been trying to get that passed. Um, this is something that we just did like a week ago. We not confront the climate crisis, but we shared this petition about net metering, which is basically this thing where it's like if people want to go solar, if they want to use reusable resources, they can produce their own electricity. And currently, that's gonna like phase out in the next few years, which means that if like Indiana Hoosiers, if they want to go solar, they'll no longer be able to produce their own electricity. So we're trying to like make sure that gets passed again. That way, obviously, one household going completely renewable isn't going to fix the climate crisis, but the more people that starts to realize that it's a problem and decide to start going solar, start using renewable power, is a lot better. The main reason why I try and fight for climate justice is because I think it's because I am privileged enough that, like as I mentioned, even by the end of the century, I probably won't be that personally affected by like the changing weather patterns and stuff. I think it's because I'm privileged enough that I can like live in a house in the suburbs and not have to worry about like farming and not have to worry about air pollution in the cities. But because there are people who do have to worry about that, and there are people who have to worry about that a lot, and it's kind of unfair for me to like, not just unfair, but it's also kind of like hurts personally to know that like, I might be fine about this, but there's other people who are going to be really severely harmed by the climate crisis, by the rising temperatures. Also, because it's in the name itself, it's climate justice. It's something that we should really all be striving for, to reach climate justice, environmental justice. Climate justice is really a great way to say it, because when you talk about the environment when you're a kid, you talk about saving the polar bears, you talk about, pandas going extinct, and you talk about, animals a lot. And these are all like good topics to talk about. Obviously, we want to save the sea turtles, we want to make sure the Arctic stops melting, but we also have to think about the fact that saving animals and saving the biodiversity of the earth is important. There are people who will people who will die because of this. You're really fighting for justice for people, and also acknowledging that, I have this privilege where I don't have to worry about fighting for climate justice, but I should, because it's a thing that will eventually affect all of us, even if I will be less affected. I feel like we really need to portray this more as like a social issue, as even at times a race issue. Obviously, more Black, Hispanic people live in cities, and cities are where air pollution is going to hit the hardest. And a social issue, an economic issue too, like as I mentioned with crop yields in Indiana, especially. It's just an issue. It's really going to affect every part of our lives, even if we want to try and deny that. Because I think we focus a lot on obviously areas that need to be focused on. The Philippines, which has been hit by like so many hurricanes this year, California, which has been like so many wildfires, and like their sky has been like red. But also just because I feel like in the Midwest, maybe this is a stereotype too, I feel like there's a lot of people that deny climate change in the Midwest. And there's a lot of people here in this region who don't think it's going to affect them, but it really will. And it really will like affect all of us, not just, as I mentioned, not just because, sea turtles are dying, not just because the temperature's going up a bit, but because of what that will lead to, that huge chain reaction that's going to harm the whole planet and harm. I feel like sometimes if we look at things too largely, people forget about themselves, but it's going to harm, say, like, my friend's dad who works as a farmer. It's going to harm him. It's going to harm, you know, someone who maybe works in the city and has asthma. It's going to harm just people, individual people.